diary and Q&A here on Slice and Dice. This is number 5, and it's all going to be talking about session 5 of the Many Lands campaign. Now, if you haven't seen session 5 yet, it is now up on our lovely YouTube channel. Just look up Slice and Dice on YouTube, or in fact there's a link down on our Twitch page. We just follow the link down below. You'll be able to catch up on all of the previous episodes, including this week's episode, episode 5, which you've called A Surreptitious Trickster. So that's all up on YouTube, and of course it is still up on our Twitch page as well, so you can watch the video there. If you haven't done so yet and want to show your appreciation, please give us a follow. Very much would appreciate that. And your continued support really does mean a lot to myself and the players as well. So as you've probably noticed, a bit of a change to the background this week and a bit late starting. This has been it's been an interesting kind of day, really. I have been clearing around in here due to I'd say a flood. That's probably an exaggeration, but basically I had a leak in the roof that was coming through the lights, which I discovered late last night coming in, and found that there was a leak all around the desk area. Fortunately, none of the equipment got damaged, because otherwise that would have been really painful, and may not have been able to get this stream done today. But fortunately, no major damage was done. I've just got one rug that smells quite bad at the moment. Everything else was just there's a bit of water around the desk, which I've cleaned off, and I think there's one extension cable which has got a bit soaked, but hopefully will still be working, and if not, it's not the end of the world. So I had that to contend with, and just now we've had a big power cut in this area. The power came back on maybe half an hour ago, so again another element working against us today, but nevertheless have persevered, so I can give you this campaign diary and Q&A. So let's rewind ourselves back to the beginning of Monday's episode. So what had happened before that was the party had basically been united. So it started off with 3. That's Seth, the half-elf rogue, Malar, the Loxodon cleric, the elephant man cleric, and I don't know why I feel the need to keep saying that, but yeah, and Fleeting Look, the turquoise tiefling paladin. The 3 of them headed into Halfrage looking for people to come and help them with moving a rock fall, which it appears that Lady Helene Grenforth, who Malar's looking for, appears to have been trapped behind. So they went to town looking for help with that, and they found help in the light of our other 3 adventurers. That's Brucon Rumblegut, or Brucon Ree, the dwarf monk. That's Neris, the high elf sorcerer with pyromaniac tendencies, and finally our plucky half-elf warlock, or now revealed to be warlock, called... I've lost his name. Why have I forgotten his name? I'm a terrible DM. I've forgotten one of my players' names. Oh, of course, Leoberin. Yes. Leoberin the Warlock, with his rough and eccentricities. So we found the 3 of them who have been willing to help out through one way or the other, anyway, have been coerced into helping. And they then discovered that before leaving town, and they were leaving the village, they were deciding to head back in the carriage that they had acquired. Instead of heading back, they were intercepted by Callie Shallows, a local investigator, who's been researching and trying to delve into what's going on at the Halfrich manufactory. So it is the biggest building of note within the village of Halfrich, this big old warehouse, along with a complex and a sort of a walled-in complex. Supposedly lots of structures made of wood are, and one particular structure that's being commissioned is a stonebreaker, which basically siege equipment with the ability to break through walls and rock and so on. Something which the party would find very, very useful. So they agreed to help Callie in her investigation and to retrieve a ledger, which would then prove that the workers at the manufactory are in fact slaves and have been bought, and slavery is currently illegal in the Republic of Burakan, and will continue, I imagine, to be illegal. So they were looking into that, and they managed to infiltrate the the manufactory. However, they couldn't do so without things going slightly wrong, and things did indeed go a bit wrong. They had a well-devised plan, which carried out in session 4, of setting fire to a carriage and then using that distraction to get the two stealthy members of the party inside the manufactory complex, and then hopefully they can get in, steal the ledger, and get out again. As it transpired, they had to fight their way through most of the guards within and managed to take 2 of them captive at the end of the last session, which when we picked up on Monday. So the 2 that they had taken prisoner, one was a bit of a red tiefling charlatan, essentially. What they didn't find out about this character, and still haven't found out, as they've left him behind, as they decided to tie him to a chair, and then when they eventually tried to escape from the manufactory, they embedded him in the ground, still tied to the chair, outside of Half-Reach, not really, well, within shouting distance of Half-Reach anyway. Dumped him in the chair. What they didn't find out was basically the red tiefling was one of the 3 mercenaries within the warehouse that was there playing dice, and he in fact had a charlatan's dice. This kind of dice can be manipulated with the person that it's attuned to roll whatever number they want, and he was basically ripping everyone else off and getting a hold of their coins. One thing the party did find, though, was the pile of coins and a small wooden box, which they haven't yet opened. But the interesting thing about these coins, and they discovered, was that they are not, in fact, from the Burrican Republic. Hello, Shadzar. Thanks for the tip there. Low to 720 from the weird resolution you have now to prevent lag from non-standard resolution. That's a very good tip. I'll take that on board. I'm not sure I can edit it on the fly, but let's just see very quickly. I can actually. Oh yeah, that is interesting. I have got it on a slightly different resolution. Let's have a look here. I might just blow. I might just blow up a little bit when I do this. So bear with me. Bum, bum, bum. Yeah, I thought that would happen. Knowledge, indeed. Knowledge is power. And in terms of the audio, it's because I've got an overhead mic, so let me just turn it up a little bit. Wow, that's going to be quite a bit louder. And yes, hi Bart, thanks for tuning in. So, anyway, where was I? So, the guy that they let go, the red tiefling, was basically ripping off the other mercenaries inside who were playing dice, and the party found the winnings, which was a ton of Iskan pentacles, different currency to Burrican, where the party currently are. So that rang some interesting alarm bells. More so was the second captive, their halfling, who seemed to use some sort of cleric spells in the last session. As it transpires, he is in fact a member of a guild, and Seth managed to identify this as he has some knowledge of some guilds. Now, I haven't put any information up yet on the World Anvil page, but I will at some point, when I get some time, put up some stuff about guilds. But Isk is well known for having lots of guilds. It is in fact an oligarchical society. It's run by guilds. And just to go through the exhaustive list of the major guilds that basically run Isk, they are in no particular order: the Golden Guild, which is the Merchants Guild. There is the Red Suns, which are a mercenary guild. The Aelin, who are the smiths and gold workers. I think Aelin is known as the gold work. Then there's also the Alchemist Guild, which specialise in magical potions and magical items. There's the Masons Guild, that's right, who are responsible for building and things like that. And then there's Winds and Wings, which are couriers and also run a printing press. So those are some of the major guilds within Isk, and they all kind of collaborate in this oligarchical society, kind of cooperate and work together, but each is trying to get one over on the other, and each guild or faction controls a particular part of Isk. or tries to control a particular part of ISK. It's a very it's a very fragile kind of political system they've got in ISK. So yeah, it's weird. It's like that it shouldn't work, but it kind of works the way that they're kind of backstabbing and trying to get one up on each other, but at the same time they're all kind of working towards the same goal in some capacity. So when their course of action aligns, they work together, and when it doesn't, then they get into a dispute. So there's those, and there is one other guild, Guild of Assassins, which is for now I will leave nameless, but will be discovered, I'm sure, later on in the campaign. And it just so happens that this particular halfling that they managed to capture in his dark cloak is in fact a member of that guild, and that guild has basically are very attractive to characters like this halfling cleric, which is a trickster, trickery cleric. So they use illusions and they use subterfuge to get what they want. And yeah, like I said, they're a guild of assassins and carrying out those kind of shady goings on in the dark. But yes, the players will encounter more of them, I'm sure, later on in the campaign, but there's just a little bit of a taster of that. And this particular halfling came into his own later on in the session as they had escaped from Half-Rage. Hadn't really noticed that he'd then awoken from being knocked out, and he had basically managed to heal himself up while they hadn't been looking, get him to swig a potion or two, get himself to create his illusory duplicate, because invoke duplicity is a trickery cleric ability which they can do with their channel to divinity. So he did that, and so the party then, as they were heading along the road, I think Malar was leading the caravan at this point, then came across this halfling figure in front of them who just stood in the road, wasn't moving. That was in fact the illusory duplicate of the halfling, and then he because you can cast spells as if they're coming through your duplicate, this halfling did that and used the command spell to get Fleeting, who was currently holding the halfling. If you watch the episode, it makes a lot more sense, but he was cradling this halfling as if it was a child. So the command spell was used for him to then drop this halfling on the ground, which he did. He let go of him, and that gave the moment for them to escape. While the party was trying to figure out what was going on with this other cloaked figure, the one on the ground there managed to sort of get away, or so he would have hoped. Seth kind of was the only one who thought, wait a minute, where all our sight's been directed towards this one thing, let's see what's going on over here. And he in fact investigated the bundle on the ground, and at that point it was just a pile of clothes. It wasn't actually there. He'd already legged it and then managed to catch him running off into the distance, and managed to catch up with him because rogues can bonus action dash as well as action dash, which makes them ridiculously fast. Yeah, so he did that, managed to catch up with him, but unfortunately through both tripping over Brucon's improvised kind of flail made out of a rope and bucket, and also then having the hold person spell cast on him, he was then rigid and stuck on the ground and not able to continue the fight. Now, if you want to disable a mobile character, hold person is the spell, and this cleric that's what he used, and it worked devastatingly well for some reason. It was only DC 13, but obviously these characters are level 1 and 2, so it's going to be still mount some kind of challenge, and it certainly did in this case. So then when eventually they realised that this was a duplicate, and in fact doing damage to the original halfling made the duplicate eventually disappear, they then seemed to have him cornered, and this halfling managed to then disappear into the shrubs and hide. And then a bit more trickery took place, some of which can't be explained through trickery cleric abilities, but in fact this will be to do with a particular item that this guy was holding on to. Plus stat, yes, you're quite right, Bart, wisdom isn't a huge stat for rogues, and they don't get proficiency on saves, so it's mostly down to, yes, that's true, that's very true. So it was a good spell to use on a rogue. There we go. So anyone who's mobile like a rogue, generally wisdom might not be their strong point. So hold person, a good spell to use. Mental note for players. Anyway, so this halfling managed to hide, and then he managed to use one of his other abilities, which this one comes from a certain magic item that this particular guild possesses, and all their members possess, which basically meant that he can mimic the voice of anybody he's heard for over a minute, as in a perfect mimic of their voice. And he did so to mimic the voice of Brucon's cousin Rudy, and used it. And at first, it seemed quite plausible that Brucon's loutish cousin Rudy would have got drunk and then got lost in the woods, because he would do that. That's definitely within the realms of possibility. Of course, if we were paying attention to the timeline, and in fact, if we'd remembered 2 sessions ago, which only occurred to me kind of at the time during this Monday's session, last time we heard of Rudy, he was still sleeping in the inn on the morning that the guys broke into and then left the manufactory. So unless he managed to get out in the time that they were out there, which was maybe an hour or so, and then somehow get a lift up there to up in a carriage or on horseback or something up to where the party end up in the woods, because they end up about 2 hours or so ride away from town, it would be completely implausible for him to be there. But anyway, that's just a geographical thing. But anyway, it seemed within the realms of possibility that he could have been there. But to their credit, so Bart and Marta, or Neris and Brucon, should I say, had a great plan. And between the two of them, managed to work out that things weren't as they seemed. Using the detect magic spell was a great call, great way of using that. The detect magic spell could detect that there was something fishy going on within, because it's only a 30 feet radius, so you have to have some inkling that something arcana-ish is happening before you use it. Otherwise, that's a spell slot gone. And yeah, that was used to devastating effect, along with Brucon's line of questioning being like, I'll ask something that only my actual cousin will know. And it works. And they managed to detect that this wasn't as it seemed. And when it became apparent that this was not going the way that this halfling had wanted, this halfling trickster, he then just did a simple cantrip that he just made, I think it was either thaumaturgy, or minor illusion, one of the two, but made the noise of a twig snapping some distance away from him in the bushes, not in another direction. And this distracted the party. All of them, in fact, went looking over there, apart from Seth, who was still looking in the woods that they'd seen this halfling disappear into the bushes. Unfortunately, he couldn't see anything, but it was a very good call, because as it transpired, while the rest of the party were investigating this misdirect, the halfling was then using the opportunity to then move away and escape. And before he left, he sent a message through the message spell to Seth, saying he was very good and perhaps they will work together one day. Perhaps him and the guild will work together one day. And it was then that Seth said, "Do you work for the guild as well?" Which I think for all of the players, they're like, "What?" They knew nothing about this. This was just a backstory thing. Wasn't going to come up, wasn't sure, and then it suddenly comes up in that conversation. It's like, aha. So just to clarify, Seth isn't actually a member of this particular Assassin's Guild. He doesn't know much about it, but it would appear that he seems to be working with somebody who is a member of that guild, and so he's kind of a contractor, you might say. But yeah, nefarious past, rogues, these things happen. So before getting to that point with the halfling, just to take things back again, because one of the most rewarding things for me as a DM in this session was the first part of the session, and that was the escape from the manufactory. So in the last one, they'd taken these 2 hostages, and other than that, it seemed pretty quiet. They'd set the slaves, they'd basically taken all their manacles off, they essentially had set them free. And it seemed like, okay, great. They went and found the ledger. Great. Okay, I think we can get out of here. And then Malar decided that he was going to go and see if he could go find Callie, so we can give her the ledger. And, that's the perfect right thing to do. But of course, what they'd missed out on was that last time there'd been a scuffle out the front of the manufactory with the flaming carriage once it had burnt down, because the guards had been, whilst putting out the fire, had also been keeping an eye out for the things that's suspicious that had been going on, and seeing Neris charging towards the shop, just running straight past them while there's a fire going on. They were like, "Hey, stop!" That just seemed, innocent people don't run, I think is the policy there. went to try and follow her, and instead was stopped by Malar and Nerys and Leobrin and Fleeting Look were all kind of involved in basically making them appear to be these demonic forces to try and scare them off, and it did in fact work. And Leobrin used his one spell slot of the day to put the owner of the shop, Pat Galright, and in fact the owner of the manufactory, to sleep during that scuffle as well, during that exchange, so that he couldn't warn anyone or stop Fleeting Look and Nerys from entering the shop. So of course the sleep spell only lasts for a minute. So while they had been inside the manufactory, he'd woken up and he'd disappeared. And what was Pat Galright going to do, knowing that intruders had entered his shop? He was going to go to the local authorities. And so he'd actually gone back to further into the village to the council chambers to call on the councillor to summon the Republic Guard that were within the village to come on over and place these people under arrest that had broken in. Now, he didn't know the extent of how many people were actually inside the manufactory, but he knew at least 2, possibly 3 or 4. So they ended up bringing as many as they could muster, 10 of these forces, and in fact Malar gets warning of this because Callie has been watching from the top of the watchtower, Inelson's watch, and was keeping an eye on things from up there. Good vantage point to see what was going on inside of the manufactory, but also see what else was going on around the village. And so she starts ringing the bell and basically telling them that they need to get out of there. And with that, the chase was on. And it was actually during this whole bit, and I didn't think about this going into it, but what was hugely rewarding was seeing how the entire team got really excited. Like all the players got really into it, really excited. Like, oh god, I'm panicking. Like, oh, what are we going to do? We've only got this much time. Like, and suddenly we get a bit flustered. All started working together as a team. They hatched a plan. They carried it out, and everyone seemed to have a really good time. Which is, one of the main things that you play Dungeons and Dragons for, is to have fun. And if that's not happening, you're doing something wrong. So it was really rewarding for me to see that happening and to see that much enjoyment, seeing them all come together. It's kind of the first time in the campaign that I've kind of taken a step back for a second and just gone, great, this is really good. There was kind of that gratification that I was doing a good job as well, because I had essentially created this situation and it happened. Thanks, Bart. So he says that can confirm had a great time, really enjoyable having a threat without immediately going into combat mode as well. And that's it. The suspension, the suspense is, and the build up is often more exciting than the actual combat itself, because the combat mechanics in D&D obviously slow everything down. Everything happens. It's supposed to be a short period of time that combat happens within, but it takes a long time with all the dice rolls and turns and all the rest of it. So the suspense really brings up the tempo more so than the combat does, and that really kind of got everyone G'd up. And so that all happened, and they hatched a plan, and by gosh darn it, it was a great plan in the end. I hadn't anticipated just how good a plan it would be. So Seth quickly rounded up the horses, which fortunately were tied up outside the tavern, although let's face it, with a burning carriage and 2 horses tied up nearby, that seems a little bit suspicious that it could be self-inflicted arson, but there we are. Anyway, he gets a hold of the horses and manages to get round to the service entrance before the guards can apprehend him, although they started marching and they definitely clocked him riding away towards the service entrance. In fact, that's probably partially what led them round to that entrance as well, when the group tried to escape. So he brought the horses in. The others, I think it was mostly Baruchon, but Nerys was there as well, knocking off the barred service entrance so they could get him inside. And then, meanwhile, we had they managed to release the slaves and got them to hopefully cause a distraction. They didn't seem to do too much, but they got them out of there. And then they rounded up some ropes, started attaching it to this to the Stonebreaker, which is essentially a big old battering ram made of wood, with metal ends, it's kind of got like a steel point on the end, but there's also, I don't think I mentioned this actually in the session, but there's a magical quality to that point as well. The way that I probably touched on it when they used it, was that when it cuts into the rock, the rock seems to just kind of melt away from it as well. It almost superheats the rock as it hits it, as well as pierces into the rock. So it does a lot of damage. It's very good against structures, and that's entirely what it was designed to do. So anyway, they latch on the horses to that, and then they're like, right, some of us are going to push it, some of us are going to ride on the top and try and distract the guards and do whatever we can to kind of hinder their progress. And although they couldn't stop the guards from throwing javelins at them and going, stop in the name of the law, they did manage to escape. It took a little while to get all of the different working components together because they were all trying to do different things, and but they managed to get out of there, and they managed to just about escape. And it was even a really cool couple of Mission Impossible, Matrix-y, or those kind of movements. Obviously, with our resident monk, there was going to be something cool like that. So Brucon rolled underneath the Stonebreaker and grabbed onto like the chassis and was like hanging on underneath there. And then he'd also got this rope and bucket he managed to acquire, and that came into its own unexpectedly. Because Marshall wasn't here, I was playing Leobrin, so I was using his stats, and he jumped up onto, he tried to jump onto the back of the Stonebreaker. I rolled terribly on his acrobatics or athletics, one of the two. That it was a terrible roll nonetheless, like a roll of 5. He started slipping off, so I was like, the nearest person was Fleeting Look sitting on the top, said, you've got to go and try and grab him. He rolls a 7, that's not enough. It doesn't manage to grab him, and so Leobrin tumbles onto the ground. And Bart goes, hang on a minute, I haven't had my action yet. Can I do this? And can I throw out the bucket to him? And, yes, of course you can. Brilliant. And he does so. And then it's like, well, obviously you're not going to be able to catch him with that, but you can throw it out and then he's got to grab it. So it was then sort of a check, and who would have thought it? Rolled a natural 20. Yes, I did, and everyone saw it, and no way you can prove otherwise. Rolled a natural 20, so that basically have this sight of this half-elf, who likes to remain very clean, but at this point is down in the dirt, completely covered, grabbing onto the rope, and then his foot getting jammed inside the bucket as well, and just being lifted off like Superman style, like driving along the ground. It was a cool little moment, and there's a few moments like that within that escape that I think all the players really enjoyed, and I certainly did as well. You all looked at me funny when I got the bucket, but it was clearly the correct move. Yes, and I wondered what you had planned with the bucket. And it came into its own then, and in fact I think used it later on and it worked quite well, although it ended up tripping Seth over. But yeah, on the whole, it's the little things like that. Also, for players watching, guys, make a note of what's in your equipment, because that stuff can be really useful in particular circumstances. Like for instance, if you've got a bucket, tie a bit of rope onto it. Hey, you've got yourself a little retrieving lasso, essentially. There's things like that within Explorer's Pack and things like that that's really worth making a note of, because you never know when they'll be handy. And it certainly was the case with the players this week. So they managed to escape from the manufactory. The problem was they didn't get the ledger back to Callie, so they're going to have to do that at some point if they want to get the 100 gold pieces to help her out. Although I think they've got slightly more pressing priorities right now. And another thing that came up, which due to poor perception wasn't entirely picked up on, and that was that when the guards came to arrest the players, one of them clocked Seth and went, "Stop! In the name of the law, you're under arrest," and pulled out a wanted poster. He couldn't really see what was on it, but it was a portrait. But I can now tell you that, you heard it here first, that portrait was in fact of somebody wearing a tricorn hat with a scarf covering their mouth and little half-elf pointy ears coming out from the scarf as well. Basically, it is a artist's depiction of what Seth looks like. So yeah, he is wanted currently, and they weren't able to work out what was going on, what he's under arrest for. But this was alluded to in the very first session, because he escaped from a prison wagon. There's going to be consequences to that. He's not the only one who's wanted, but he's the only one within the party that's wanted. There are others too on that list. There's a halfling known as Royston the Bag, and there's also an as yet unnamed Dragonborn rogue, the Copper Dragonborn, that they that they came across, again, that Seth met in the first episode. So you're starting to see some ramifications from earlier actions. This is how this world works. Things develop over time. And so there'll be more of that later on, but for now, that's all I can reveal. So we ended the episode this week with the party getting back to the rockfall using the stonebreaker. They also managed to, while half the party were using the stonebreaker, breaking through the rock and breaking into what appears to be a cave. The other half managed to get together some wood and bracken to then mask their path, because they assumed that the guards from Half-Rach will be coming after them, and so will follow the road. And seeing as the entrance to the rockfall is right next, quite literally next to the road, they're going to have to hide that stonebreaker and the horses and so on, or else they're going to be very easily found out and possibly have the law on their tail again, and they certainly don't want that right now. So we end the very end of the session, broke into the cave. Seth starts shouting inside, and just hearing his own voice back, if I might say so myself, was quite a good echo impression. And then at the very end, asking if there's anyone inside, they heard a hello, hello, hello. It's from somebody within the cave. Who will that be? We'll find out on the session on Monday, which, fingers crossed, should all be going swimmingly as per usual. I'll have this back over there in the correct place, and the table will be out, and everything will be set up as it normally is, and hopefully this whole flooding, leaking, power cutting stuff, that'll be done with. That'll just be this week's problem, and next week will be fine. We shall see. Before I go, you've seen the box right there with the fake dice. Thank you to everyone who's got in touch so far with your recommendations for hashtag fake dice. Keep them coming in. I might have to restrict how many suggestions I get per person if it's getting a bit one-sided in the amount of suggestions I'm getting from one particular viewer, possibly. But nevertheless, keep those suggestions coming in. Once we get to 220, I will then be rolling the first fake dice in the campaign, which is very exciting. We shall see what happens with that. But anyway, join me and the rest of the players here on Monday night. That's from 6 p.m. here on Slice and Dice. Until then, thank you for watching. Have a good evening.